I'd now like to invite our chair for the next high-level panel and to invite our 6 panelists to come up on the stage. I'd like to invite Dr. Frank Reisberman, who's CEO of the CGIAR Consortium, and this panel will be looking particularly at responding to the global challenges of a food-secure future. So if I could invite her.
Well, thank you. That was an excellent presentation of Brazil as a success story, if you like. Not sure you explicitly said it, or otherwise I'd like to underline it, that a key reason, in our view, of Brazil's success in agriculture was its very conscious decision to invest in research for agriculture through Embrapa. And there are very few countries that are following that example. Very few countries have chosen to invest as much in agricultural research as Embrapa, and it is worth considering in our session this afternoon what the role is of research and knowledge generation in agriculture, in food security, and in these related issues. So that is, if you like, our theme. Can I introduce to you the panel that we have? The format will be very similar to the panel this morning, and I'll try and do at least, well, it'll be very difficult to do as good a job as Lindiwe this morning, because I think she did an excellent job, but I'll try and follow her example of brief interventions, also opportunities for you to ask questions from the floor and from people following this online. So like this morning, we won't have presentations. We'll mostly have the panel answering questions. The panel, to begin here on my right, is Mark Holderness, the Secretary General of the Global Forum for Agricultural Research, Cristina Tirado, Director of the Center for Public Health and Climate Change, Jonathan Wadsworth, Executive Secretary of the CGIAR Fund, and Francis Seymour, the Director General of the Center for International Forestry Research, CIFOR, and Raj Paroda, former Director General of the Indian System of Agricultural Research, and today representing APAARI, the Asian Pacific Association of Research Associations. That's the panel. I'm sure they will bring diverse views to a very interesting debate, really. But first let me say that we are here in Agriculture and Rural Development Day. Rachel Kite this morning made it clear that she expects that this will be the last Agricultural and Rural Development Day, because in future we'll have integrated landscape days. And that's a good lead-in to the fact that this ARDD is actually in the context of an environmental conference. And let's not forget that it is quite an important achievement that agriculture is now seen as part of the solution and no longer simply as part of the problem. Now, what are the kind of solutions that agriculture can provide? Clearly, agriculture has been neglected for about a generation in much of the world. Funds for agriculture have dropped precipitously, funds for research that is, but also investments in many other parts of agriculture. We will need increased, sustained investments in agriculture to respond to the challenges of food security that have been put back on the radar of political priority, particularly through the food price spikes of 2008, 2010, 2011. Is the world ready for that? Well, in part, I would like to use this opportunity here this afternoon to say that the CGIAR, the consortium of 15 research centers that have reorganized themselves to meet these challenges of food security, rural poverty, nutrition, health, and environmental sustainability are announcing here this afternoon their new portfolio of 15 research programs, a major undertaking, about $1 billion worth of research a year, which we think is the key investment, publicly funded investment in research on agriculture, to drive that engine of innovation on science and technology that I think the Embrapa presentation showed so eloquently can have massive impacts if done well. So we hope to follow in that sense in your footsteps. We are very excited that, if you like, public investments in agriculture, science and technology are sort of back on the agenda, and after, indeed, as I said, a generation of neglect, funding is back up. After many years of sort of flat funding, investors, donors are responding. After many years where our CGIAR budget was more in the order of $300–400 million, expectations are that this year it will be about $800 million. That's still short of the International Food Policy Research Institute's assessment of what it would take to get to sustainable intensification of agriculture. They predicted that to meet those needs there would need to be about $1 billion of investment in public research by 2013. So we're going there. They said it then would need $1.6 billion in that small part of the agricultural sector. Investments in agriculture as a whole are at least an order of magnitude larger just in Africa. So that's the challenge. That's the context. We're pleased to be here. We think we have an exciting portfolio of research programs, and we have a number of panelists that will talk about that and about the issues of science and technology and the role of knowledge and innovation in meeting the challenges that we're discussing in Rio head on. So with that, can I ask the first question from Mark Holderness? Mark, these are very complex issues. Complex solutions are required. In all that, what is the role of partnerships such as GFAR represents?
Well, thank you, Frank. And I think as you've described...
Is your microphone on? Yeah. Okay.
It's on? Yeah?
Okay.
As you've described very eloquently, the CGIAR is itself a partnership between international research organizations. And what we've seen in recent years is a radical transformation of the whole landscape of agricultural research for development systems and the processes that go with it. We've seen the radical increase in investment and gains made, as we've just heard, from Brazil, India, China. Many other countries are cottoning on the value of investing and the returns you get from investing in this sector and the role of agricultural knowledge in achieving economic development, in enabling economic development. And that's also brought new ways of working with the private sector coming to the fore. But not just the private sector, also with farmers' own innovation being a key part of the process. The no-till, as was just described by Dr. Arrayas, is one of the key changes that's happened. I think it's close to 10% of the world's production now. And that was originated by farmers. And research has added value to that and built it on. So there are partnerships all over the place in here. And we must not still think about a technology pipeline. It's not about scientists knowing what's best for the farmer. It's about putting farmers at the center of the process so that we're all focused on the same outcome, the same desired goal. Because if we don't share those goals, we're not going to get there. We're not going to each play our part in these very complex webs and pathways required to turn new knowledge into innovation, into enterprise for small farmers, as we heard about this morning. Nor are we going to take full account of the fact that women are nearly half of the farming population and are contributing in a measure far above what the institutions gathered here give recognition to. We need to reframe our thinking around this. And we're delighted that the investment in the international system is growing. It needs to, it has to, if we're going to achieve these goals. But alongside that, we need to also engineer that 2- to 3-fold increase in the global system, in the strengthening of farmer organizations so they can make use of these and share their knowledge, in the strengthening of advisory services, in the strengthening of national research systems, whether they're public or private, so that they're delivering the change needed. And so it is a partnership. It's about sharing the outcomes and all playing our part towards that. And I think that's the big shift we're seeing. We're delighted to see it in the CGIAR. The CRPs are very much focused this way. But we need now to learn from that message, make sure that those goals are common to the farmers, are shared by everyone in the wider environment outside this room, and then we can really build real and effective partnerships to achieve the huge scale changes we need to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And indeed, when we speak of the CGIAR, the publicly funded system, we often talk about its 15 member research centers, but of course crucial to these 15 research programs are indeed the hundreds of partnerships, both upstream with advanced research institutes, organizations like Embrapa, as well as downstream seed companies, extension services, and a host of others that are all critical in delivering the solutions that we need. Still though, Jonathan, if I may ask you, you're our money man, you're working for the new CGIAR fund. In a climate of austerity, how can we justify spending increased investments in agricultural research?
Thank you very much for the question, Frank. My response would be, how can we not justify it? How can we afford not to invest in agricultural research and development when the proof of the value of that, of the good investment that it is here before us in Brazil and in Embrapa? I think we've just had a fantastic explanation of how judicious, intelligent investments in research and development can really boost agriculture and can increase the productivity that we're looking for as we move towards 2050. I used to work in a tropical country not very far from here, a very poor country in the agricultural research system. And we used to always say in that organisation that countries don't do agricultural research because they're rich. They become rich because they do agricultural research. Now that sounds a very easy way of saying things, but the proof is in the pudding here in Brazil. Let me just share with you a couple of facts. In this moment of austerity, governments have been cutting back on their international development budgets, yet over the last couple of years the CGIAR has managed to grow by 10% year on year, as you mentioned earlier, in terms of funding. Now there's a tremendous faith out there, I think, in the donor community, which is pinning its hopes that the CGIAR can produce those global public goods which can feed through international systems. And the reasons are that it's proven that this is an excellent investment. Very few investments will, on average, yield 40% social rates of return year on year. And agricultural research does that on average. And there are much bigger returns than that in particular cases. Just one example from the CGIAR, based on work of the International Rice Research Institute in Asia. Last year it was shown by an independent government evaluation from a donor country that the research just in germplasm, or rather the benefits to germplasm research, is $10 billion a year in Asia, in rice only. The figures speak for themselves. Donors should and are justified totally in putting more resources into global public good research through the CGIAR and other organisations.
And when you take that message home, I mean, you're a Brit, it's a strong supporter of systems like this, but a parliament that asks for value for money. Does that message play well?
Thank you very. Yeah, it's when before I came to this job in the fund, I was indeed working for DFID in the UK. That message does play well with even under moments of austerity. The British government increased substantially their funding to international agricultural research last year. I think because we have such a strong, proven case from the CGIAR to be able to show that it's good value for money and the results are there for everybody to see.
Thank you. Now, of course, Sustainable intensification is very high on our agenda, but we should not forget that it doesn't only matter how much, but also how, if you like. So, Raj, Paroda, I'm going to ask you a question about gender. Clearly you're not the woman on this panel. I'm glad there are other women on the panel and that I can ask the gender question to you because you represent a wide variety of partnerships where these issues are clearly important. So this is not a new issue, right? In the Beijing Declaration was 1995. We have known solutions here for years, what it requires to sort of break through these barriers, these obstacles. What is your assessment of the situation today?
Thank you, Frank. Beijing Declaration did desire to have platform for action for gender in general, for upliftment of society globally. Since then, 17 years have passed, and when we recently looked at through an international conference on women in agriculture held in New Delhi in March this year, it came out clearly that not much seemed to have been done, especially with regard to gender in agriculture. We have not yet even recognized their important role, which should justify more investment, both in terms of sharing knowledge with them, improving their capacity, and also providing them required innovation for removing drudgery. And we have also not understood as if their role, which is likely to increase production by almost 20% if supported well, but more important role is in the context of household nutrition security. And it has come out very clearly that though production has increased, but at household level, food security and nutrition has not been addressed, and it is not related to production unless role of women is properly recognized and they are empowered. And in that process, it has also been realized that they are the key player for not only pre-production operations, but also for post-harvest operations. And the losses that are occurring have to be also saved. And in that context, role of women is also important. So we see that there are issues and inequalities still exist. And unless we really do substantially something, the situation will not improve. And with that regard, we need concrete evidences, both in terms of their requirements and needs, whether it is in relation to education, extension, or for research. And we have to reorient our research agenda globally. And in that respect, I do see that time has come that we provide them access to not only knowledge, but also to resources and productive systems, and empower them and make their voice heard and ensure that they come together and learn and be equal partner in the production system globally.
Thank you, Raj. Indeed, I think by now we all know that in many countries the majority of smallholder farmers are indeed women. So you may ask, is one of your 15 CGIAR research programs a gender program? In fact, it is not. Not because this is not an important issue, in a way because it is a too important issue. We've decided that each of these 15 programs should mainstream gender issues right throughout the portfolio. And to make sure that that's not just an empty promise, we do have a rather experienced gender expert, Jackie Ashby, who's working with each of these 15 CRPs to make sure that they do have a gender strategy in each of the CRPs, and we'll also make sure that that is followed up by activities and outcomes that are related to that. Of course, it's also not just research. I mean, the extension or the dissemination or the uptake is also often gender blind. Is that appropriate, Raj, can I ask you, or is there also a need to have gender-specific follow-up activities in how we disseminate research?
In fact, in this context, it was very well recognized that we need to look at the specific needs of gender in agriculture. We have to build partnership globally and come out with a gender in partnership program involving key players, and also see that this kind of debate is not first and the last, but should have a continuum. So we decided that Global Conference for Women Agriculture should be held every 3 years, and next one will be held in Africa, hosted by FARA, the African Association of Agriculture Research Systems. And we also hope that by GFAR 2, when we meet in Uruguay by October end, for which we are putting up a very impressive agenda for panel discussion for women in agriculture, we will have a very structured proposal for global in agriculture partnership.
Thank you. Now, you will also hear from the other two panelists, of course, but to give you a chance to interact and not have you just sit and listen, we thought, just like this morning, this might be a good moment to give you a chance to ask a couple questions, and then we'll have the next two panelists. Are we ready with microphones? Are we ready to do the right thing here? So raise your hands. Maybe while you do that, I look like I might have an online question. Indeed, I think we have two. A Twitter question on the 1 Acre Fund. How can ag practitioners ensure that farmers living under the $2 a day line benefit from increased ag investments? Do we really reach the poor farmers? That's one question. And the second question, that's a question from Stephanie Hansen. The second question from Farid Wali through Facebook is, Gene Ziegler said in his book, Massive Destruction, we can feed 12 billion people. But I do not understand why there is so much food wastage in developed countries while children are dying at the other end of the spectrum. So those are two questions that I'd like the panelists to consider and see if we have hands that we could put a microphone to, and who would be the next one, and the second one is there, and maybe a third in the back. So if we take those three questions, please, in that order, go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Cristina from Heinrich Böll Foundation in Germany. So it is great hearing from you how well things go in the agricultural science community, but however, looking at the tremendous challenges the world is facing today with climate change, planetary boundaries which are not respected, and social inequality, I would like to hear your strategies, how you adapt your institutions and your research to deal with those multidimensional and very complex problems we are facing today. Because from my perspective, it's not an option to do, like in the research community, business as usual. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you. Very clear question. Shall we take all three and then respond to those? Please, I think you're the second and then the third, or the other way around, either way. Yes, go ahead. Your microphone is not on, at least I can't hear you.
I would rather prefer to ask my question in Portuguese.
Okay.
And I am from APAARI. Eu sou presidente da Associação Brasileira de Irrigação e Drenagem.
Irrigation and Drainage. That's the Brazilian Committee, International Commission, Irrigation and Drainage. The point is, we have been seeing little thing, not too much, concerning the agricultural development and the irrigated agriculture. And all the big challenges we can see here are in the area of production and safety in nurture and also in bioenergy. We cannot see in any scenario the possibility of generating incomes to have the supply without a second agriculture, irrigated agriculture development. In Brazil, we really have great quantities of water, but we are still like cradle, like babies concerning this. Today, I was here with the president of EC, and in China, for instance, they have 60,000 irrigated hectares. In Brazil, we have about 4.5 million. Then I'd like the international centers, because they have too much experience. We know that in Sri Lanka, people care about this matter, but we see it's a huge challenge among the technicians and the universities for we to permeate this work concerning irrigated agriculture. Thank you. To permeate.
Thank you. For those of you who didn't have their translation on, this question focused on the potential for irrigation in Brazil, which the person who asked the question, I'm sorry I don't know your name, said is much behind. That might have to be a question for Embrapa, but please, and the last question in this.
Hi, my name is Owen Granger-Jones from IFAD. Everything we are learning about climate resilience and landscape management suggests that systems thinking is essential. So I'm interested in the panel's assessment of how successfully and what have been the challenges for the CGIAR system in moving from very much what was perceived as a crop focus to a systems focus, or at least a systems and crop focus.
Thank you. Well, it's always easiest to start with the last question first, and that sounds like a perfect question for Francis if you're ready to answer. Would you be?
Sure. I think one of the challenges that the CG system has had for a couple of decades is trying to integrate across the different portfolios, having started out with the crop centers as the heartland, and then over time added centers like the one I had focusing on natural resources management. And I think one of the most important aspirations of this recent reform is to try to integrate more across the different centers to exploit the synergies of the different kinds of toolkits and focal areas that are represented in the system. It's certainly early days, so I think it would be premature to claim success, but certainly in the research programs that we're involved in, we are being very intentional at, for example, in the research program on forest trees and agroforestry, taking a full landscape approach. So not just focusing on undisturbed forest or even disturbed forest, but across the full landscape, and working with the World Agroforestry Center, Biodiversity International, and CIAT to understand the role of trees on farms all the way across the landscape. And in a way, this brings me to a partial answer to the question from the woman from the Heinrich Wöhl Foundation. We're very conscious of the complexity of the kinds of problems that we're trying to address, and so trying to be very intentional about bringing a multidisciplinary approach to these questions, as well as the landscape approach, and understanding that there are going to be some technical issues related to how to improve productivity, but many of the challenges actually require social science input to understand, what are some of the challenges in helping value chains, helping small farmers get a bigger slice of the value chain of the various forest and tree-related commodities. But also, importantly, we now understand it's all about governance. Who gets to decide? Where are the property rights vested? All that political decision-making all the way up. So it's an incredibly complex picture of all the hardest questions that we're trying to address. So we're trying to bring to bear a lot of different assets, multidisciplinary and at different scales from across the system to bear on them. So as I say, it's early days. We're less than a year into this research program on forest trees and agroforestry, but already there's a sense of excitement around the scientists getting together about what might be possible by pooling those various intellectual assets.
Thank you, Francis. Now, Mark, you represent quite a few farmer organizations. Do you feel the first question we got from Stephanie Hansen, is there a chance that the kind of research you're doing can indeed reach farmers that live under $2 a day?
I think it's a very good question, because from personal experience, when we're working with the truly resource-poor farmers, the challenges are not just about can they take up that technology. It's the enabling environment for them to be able to even consider taking up that technology, or indeed whether that technology is appropriate for their usage. If we reframe the question and say what are the needs of those farming communities for their growth, for their development, to turn, as I think Kanayo said this morning, to turn farmer innovation into farmer entrepreneurship, to create economic opportunity at that level, we have to really rethink our research questions. We have to rethink it through the farmer's eyes and look at how new ideas, new thinking can benefit, but also how it can be introduced in a risk-free environment or a minimal risk environment. Because the big reason why technologies stay on the shelf and don't get used by small farmers is that it's their lives and their livelihoods that are at stake. And to make a change is a dramatic shift, particularly if it involves taking on a credit loan, for example, in which your entire livelihood can depend on that technology. So I think we have to be much more sensitive to the perspectives of the farmers, of what they are seeking to change in their own lives, and how new ideas can feed that, and feed ideas in through ways that are owned by those communities, that are owned by those farmers, not parachute in a technology. It's a big shift, and it changes, when we work it backwards, it also changes what kind of upstream technologies we're thinking about, and how we do these in an integrated way so that we're not actually, as I say, thinking of the farmer at the end of a pipeline, but thinking of the farmer as the engineer of change themselves, the innovator, the person who can make those decisions. And what we can do is inform them and help them to make better informed decisions.
Thank you. So, if you're willing, I was going to pass you the microphone to answer the irrigation question for Brazil.
Bom, Elvésio, nós já conhecemos há muito tempo, né? Bom, a gente sabe que no Brasil houveram uma série de programas, né, que incentivaram a questão da irrigação há 20 anos, 30 anos atrás, não é isso? E a gente hoje tem um vazio, meio uma distribuição dos programas de irrigação em vários ministérios, né? E talvez a gente não tenha um foco muito claro disso em termos de um programa maior de irrigação para dar essa alavancagem que você estava comentando. Quer dizer, em termos de pesquisa, nós temos na Embrapa ainda um contingente de pessoas que ainda trabalham fortemente com a pesquisa na parte de irrigação, porque eu acho que falta um programa governamental de incentivo à irrigação de forma que isso possa avançar mais, né? Então,
for it to go forward. That's the answer I would have now, and the international centers maybe can help with something, but it's very specific, local point. Maybe an international point cannot work with these people that work with public good, that has to be broader, but irrigation is more specific. Thank you. Obrigada.
I'm not sure we have a lot to say about the other question on food waste, but that was definitely a topic that was addressed in the morning and in one of the learning sessions as well. So with your permission, I'll skip that question for this panel, unless one of the panelists would like to address that. Would you? Very briefly.
Very briefly.
Very briefly.
One of the things we're doing in the GCARD process going forwards is looking at foresight of future needs, future projections, and these big questions of where are the real gaps to be addressed? Is it better to avoid 40% wastage of food or to put all our efforts into producing 10% more? We have some big questions here about our focus, so that's one of the big foresighting questions we're all dealing with.
Thank you. Definitely true. The one question you asked about institutional reform. We need a lot of institutional reform, I think, to be ready for the challenges in many areas. There is certainly talk about institutional reform of all organizations in agriculture, and FAO has a new Director General that is tackling that question energetically. And indeed, the CGIAR has struggled with, how do we organize ourselves best for these challenges for a long time, and the last few years was the first time when that really has resulted in a major change that we feel prepares the organization much better for these challenges. And particularly how the system had evolved was that it had a very large number of smallish projects as many as 3,000, that most of the institutes worked on very often by themselves, and the sense was that we really need more focused, large-scale, longer-term programs that are cutting right across the institutions, and that was, if you like, the institutional change that has been implemented that makes that possible. And indeed, the portfolio of research programs that we're presenting here today is the answer to what we feel is that challenge. And CCAFS, our climate change program that is very present here, is an example of a program that addresses one of these challenges that wasn't really traditional in any of our centers, and I think quite effectively works across the 15 centers of the CGIAR and many other partners. So we take that as an example that we are able in this new institutional structure to take on challenges that frankly 5–10 years ago we wouldn't have been able to take on. So I hope that that answers some of your questions, if not all of them. I think we haven't talked about nutrition and health, and in light of our time, we'll come back to all the panelists with your key questions in a bit. I'm trying to preserve your own time for your take-home messages, and I'd like to, if we can, give the floor to Cristina Tirado, who will speak a bit with us about nutrition and health, because of course we all know that it's no longer just the old calories goal, but what can this form of agricultural research and development that we're discussing here do for nutrition and health? Can you respond to that and what you think is your perspective?
Thanks a lot for the question and for bringing this to the Agriculture Day. I mean, it's the first time that the Agriculture Day is directly addressing the opportunities that agriculture has in order to address nutrition insecurity and how to promote health. And in fact, the opportunities are huge, but still we have, there are ifs. And one of the conditions, the main conditions, is that when we develop a research agenda, research and development agenda, this has to be done in a coherent, coordinated and jointly manner. We have to put together to work researchers working on agriculture, on nutrition and health in an integrated manner. And you have to, probably everybody will agree with me, that so far these different research have completely different languages. Then we have first to get these different groups to talk same language, and this may start with a preliminary effort that could be based on using some policy analysis or methodologies for multi-sectorial policy analysis, as for example, health impact assessments or other type of risk-benefit analysis or other methodologies that are looking into the impacts of multi-sectorial policies. Then the problem that we are seeing is that the challenges that we are facing with nutrition are huge. First, we have almost 1 billion people that are undernourished and that they are dying from hunger. And at the same time, we have almost 1 billion people that are overweight. We are facing a situation that we have 500 million adults that are clinically obese. And the epidemic of obesity is huge and is hitting very much children, and this is something that we have to address immediately. This was mentioned in the World Health Assembly and in the General Assembly. The cardiovascular diseases, chronic diseases and non-communicable diseases account for more than 60% of all the global mortality. We are talking about 35 million of deaths that are due to diseases related to diet, diseases related to consumption of high saturated fats from animal origin, and low consumption of fruits and vegetables. The problem is that an 80% of this burden of disease affects to countries of low income and medium countries, then it's not a problem of, of high income countries. It's affecting to the most poor. And we are looking into problems, factors that affect these issues are related to poverty, to access, and to inequity. Then the opportunities from the agriculture sector are huge. The CGIAR has recently presented a program to address agriculture, nutrition, and health in an integrated way. The most important component is one that integrates policies and programs. The others are more vertical, consisting biofortification, taking care of the safety and the quality of the value chain, the food value chain. And in that way, we can address problems of undernutrition. But again, we need methodologies that will give us the priorities, like health impact assessments, which have nothing to do with environmental impact assessments, or other analyses that are looking into social analysis, like gender analysis, human rights frameworks that will give us an idea of intergenerational justice. And this could be a good approach to address undernutrition. Now, the other problem of decreasing cardiovascular diseases is more complex, but there is a tendency that has been led by the European Commission to have health-promoting agriculture policies that are giving incentives to the production of fruits and vegetables, and that are at the same time lowering the emissions from the livestock sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's definitely a new challenge that we, in agriculture, often think as natural that we also would look at nutrition. But having worked at the Gates Foundation recently, there, the majority of the folks are actually health folks, and they think it's naturally their prerogative to look at nutrition and health. So there is a very interesting set of challenges. Here we're mostly focusing on our integration between agriculture and the environment, but there's a very similar set of challenges as we start to focus more on linkages between agriculture and health and nutrition. Thank you for sort of opening that particular very complex terrain a little bit. So, Francis, we know that you're clearly a fan of the landscape approach. That's already a bit of a solution. But first, we're sitting here behind this beautiful picture of agriculture and forest, which sort of makes it very clear that agriculture is also a key driver of deforestation. So how do we work this out, where agricultural or our type of R&D actually helps bring about this sort of shared goal of sustainable food production and maintaining ecosystem services?
Thank you, Frank. Let me make 2 points. The first is that it's high time to move beyond a characterization of the debate that we have to choose between forests and food security, that somehow forests have to be sacrificed to feed the world. I think the research has been clear for quite a while now that forests contribute quite a bit to food security. Just as an example, the estimates about the offtake of bushmeat in the Congo Basin provides a contribution of proteins and fats to diets that are on the same order of magnitude as beef in this region. So it's huge. We also now have a data set of about 8,000 households from in and around forest areas and household level quarterly recall data showing that on average forest-related products contribute 24% of household income that can be used to buy food, for example, and that's more than the proportion contributed by agricultural crops. So again, huge and usually not captured in national accounts. So forests and food security relationship already established. Where the research frontier is more empirical results about the contribution of forest-based ecosystem services, such as hydrological services, both on the local and up to continental scales, but also pollination services and others that so far we have a hunch they're significant, but not a lot of broad-scale data on just how significant. Second point I want to make is that agricultural intensification is a necessary but not sufficient condition to address agriculture as a driver for deforestation. Again, we've had research for at least a decade showing that under certain circumstances, if you increase agricultural productivity, you can actually accelerate deforestation because there's more opportunities to make money from doing so. So, and this point was actually made this morning in the learning event on land sparing, land sharing, and we heard some very interesting research results from here in Brazil and Mato Grosso once again proving that point. Agricultural intensification needs to be coupled with governance and policy reforms, things like strengthened land tenure, things like strengthened law enforcement, that are on abundant display here in Brazil as some of the factors behind the incredible success story that we heard about this morning of the rapid decrease in the deforestation rate here. And it has to do with some of those policy tools being brought to bear. Now here where the research frontier is understanding under different circumstances what combination of policy tools need to be put into place, the strengthened land tenure, the strengthened law enforcement, the payments for ecosystem services and other market and other tools to come out with the optimum land allocation between agriculture and forests to optimize the many services that we get from both.
Thank you. Well, that's a very interesting set of perspectives, I thought, quite rich. We would like to go to the panel in a little bit to their key take-home messages. As always in these sessions, time is short, time flies when you're having fun, but I'd love for you to have a few more opportunities to ask questions. If you all collaborate and make your questions brief, and maybe we'll ask the panel to answer their questions as part of the take-home messages. So you listen to the questions and then we respond with our take-home messages and take some of these questions into account. So I see 3 hands here in this corner for microphones, and there's also on the totally opposite side, the big hand up, and then there's your hand. So that's 5, the lady here in the middle. Right, so are you ready? Do you have a microphone?
Yeah,
please.
I'm ready. I'm Kaganga John, Director of the Chicano Environment Association, and a farmer at the grassroots level, and food security fellow. First of all, as a farmer at the grassroots, we appreciate the work of the researchers. But again, as farmers, we are at the crossroad. Because, for example, there is a report which has been just published by Michael, Antonio Robinson, and John Ferguson, to do with GMO, which we think it is also promoting agriculture and then food security. That GMOs have been, it is found that it is dangerous and it is not recommended. Therefore, we think that is terrible. Then, secondly, what I would like to suggest that when we want to develop agriculture, we have to look into regions, like especially now Africa. Even when you look here, you will see very few Africans who are here in such a very global meeting, which is very important, whereby we would have given our issues. Therefore, I would like the research and any other development partner to look into, when they are looking into agriculture, to see that they also focus at regions. And then financing, we have a problem. Finance, okay, a lot of finance is going to research, but when it comes to a farmer at the grassroots, even the government, it is not the way out our government are financing agriculture at the local community is really very, 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 very poor. And then, for example, in our country, in Uganda, we are supposed to the GDP to increase to 10%, the Maputo Declaration. But up to now, even 5% has not reached. Therefore, I urge you, all the leaders during this important summit that they look into the small farmers. And also, it has been said that the farmers have been brought into at the center. But that is just talking. It is not true, because I am a farmer at the grassroots.
All right, we'll definitely ask Mark to respond to that. And indeed, let me agree with you and emphasize that when we're asking for increased and sustainable investments in agriculture, there's definitely not only in research, but an amount of, at least an order of magnitude higher is necessary to invest in agriculture beyond that. So while the microphone changes here, can we go to the other side of the room?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I would like to ask you a question about drylands. I am Patrice Berger. I'm from a French NGO and here for an international network working in drylands all over the world, namely DryNet. As you know, drylands is 44% of the land cover in the world. And in these dryland areas, we have 2 billion, a bit more, 2 billion of people living there. And among them, probably the majority of the people who suffer from hunger, farmers suffering from hunger. So these people depend on rain-fed agriculture and are often pastoralists. What do you offer? What are your research? What are your solutions for these people? I must say that since 25 years I'm working in this area, I do not see very much progress in this field. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's definitely a question we can answer also. Please, to the other side.
Thank you. My name is Zakaria Sambahe. I'm from Senegal. And I would like to raise one question about land grabbing. Because in Africa, farmers are facing these problems. Even if in what we call arable land, to access in arable land is very, very difficult. It's a challenge in Africa. So I would like to know, what do you think about this problem of land grabbing? Because we are talking about biofuel.
Yes.
If it is possible to produce without arable land, it's very difficult in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. The issue of land grabbing. I had a lady in the back there who had her hand up considerably earlier, if you don't mind, Sarah. Please, are you ready? Yeah.
I'm Barbara Adolf from IIED in London. My question is about the different pillars that are required to actually make food and nutrition work for everyone. We talked quite a lot about sustainable intensification, and we talked a little bit about reducing consumption and wastage. There's also the issue of access to food. And there are issues for consumers in terms of affordability, but also for producers, the extent to which they are able to benefit from technologies such as those that's produced by the CG centers. And Mark touched on this a little bit by saying we need different types of technologies for poor farmers. What I don't currently see in the CG system is a systematic disaggregation of different types of target groups of farmers for different types of technologies, and a more systematic approach to ensure that not just the farmer is represented in the various governance bodies, but different types of farmers, including those who are currently really falling through the gap and who are not covered by the safety nets, but also not part of those that can join value chains and produce surplus that can be marketed.
You're all adding a lot of richness to the summing up issues of the panelists, and I see more hands come up than we can really respond to, given time. I had earlier recognized this gentleman, and I think if you can really cooperate and make it a short question, then you could be the last short question. I'm sorry, I can see at least 10 more hands, but we're running out of time, so I'll become just as firm as Lindy were this morning. Please.
Very short. Fred Pearce, New Scientist magazine in London. Is the Brazilian model, especially the Cerrado miracle, an appropriate model for Africa?
Very good question. And the last one.
Thank you. I'm Sarah Shear from Eco-Agriculture Partners and also a facilitating organization for the Landscapes for People, Food and Nature initiative, in which many people here are involved. And the question I wanted to ask yourself, Frank, Francis, perhaps the director of Embrapa, is what do you think is the current status of landscape science? How well can we do research on these multi-sectoral interfaces and interactions?
Thank you. Well, I know you'd like to ask more questions, but to give you a chance to also hear some answers, at least from the panel, I think we have to shift to that now. Given time, we will have to wrap up fairly soon. So with that, I think you've actually given a pretty challenging job to these folks here on the panel. But Mark looks like he is just ready for his final minute of sum up. 3, max.
Minute for all those. Okay, very briefly, I think the points raised by the farmer from Uganda, I think,
yes, right,
about the role of technologies at grassroots level. This is where it's absolutely essential that the farmers are involved in technology development from the outset. It's no good looking at what we think is good for a farmer. We have to have the farmer's choices as part of that framing. Because if the farmers don't own the objective of the research or the new knowledge or the innovation, why are we doing it? It won't be successful, it won't be taken up. And we're exposing those farmers to risk. Secondly, I think we have to rethink the nature of partnerships. We've heard a lot today about the need to move to multi-stakeholder partnerships. That means breaking down the walls of institutions. It means stopping our silo thinking. It means getting away from this research versus education versus extension debate, this sterile debate about social science versus science. It's crazy. We're in it about development. We're dealing with people's real lives, which are complex and facing multiple dimensions, and it's time our institutions woke up to that and started actually working together instead of claiming that they have the one true faith or the one true piece of knowledge that will solve the world. We must, to get at this, we must tackle capacities. As Frank mentioned earlier, we have a huge deficit both in capacities and in investment. If we look at an example, say Central Asia, typically 0.05% of agricultural productivity is being reinvested in knowledge systems, in research, in extension. It's pathetic. How are we, at that scale, going to achieve change? The same is true of much of Francophone West Africa. Many countries are making the investment, are making the change, but we have that, has to happen in other countries as well, and we have to mobilize the international system to support those changes and add the value where the investment can't be made. We must look at those dynamics also of new capacities. We have to think about the new skill sets required. We have to get our young people active, engaged, seeing a viable career in agriculture and all the service industries around agriculture. And fundamentally, we have to also recognize that research and new knowledge are essential in achieving these objectives, but they're not themselves sufficient unless we put those other enabling policies, environments, credit access, land access, all those pieces in place. We can have the best technology in the world and it will not solve the problem. So joined up thinking is definitely the order of the game.
Thank you. Cristina, could you follow on? Mark is making our job not necessarily easier, but at least he has a clear wish list.
Yeah, thank you. The main point to take home from my part will be that so far agriculture has been just pushing to improve productivity, and in that way only agriculture growth has not allowed us to meet the Millennium Development Goal on reducing children malnutrition and Millennium Development 4 of reducing children mortality. Then I think that we have to move from the mentality or the idea that we have to feed the people and to start to think that perhaps we need to nourish people. And this is the old paradigm that we were discussing before about how society is currently suffering a double burden of malnutrition. And some of the proposals that have been proposed to address this problem are working, health promoting agriculture systems and policies that have the benefits of reducing emissions and promoting sustainable diets will require, as you were mentioning, an important multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholders partnerships that will work together in developing integrated research and development programs. And this integrative approach, what is requiring is that we have to develop tools and indicators that are going to allow us for joint planning and joint assessment. And for example, just to give you an idea of how things are coming up, in the last World Health Assembly, it was an expert consultation in WHO to see how, what could be the health indicators that they could bring through all the thematic areas at Rio+20. And they developed a super interesting indicators for agriculture sustainability and for agriculture and for food security and nutrition. And in fact, if you have seen the results of the Rio dialogues, one of the main recommendations that people outside the governments and the UN are recommending is the development of food systems that are, and agriculture systems that are sustainable, that ensure food security and promote health. Then this is quite encouraging. Thank you.
Thank you. John?
Thank you.
The other one? Yeah.
Am I on? Yes.
Okay, it works.
Okay. Only a very short time, I know, Frank. But listen, I think the questions that came in towards the end just go to show what a complex situation we're in. And there's nothing simple about this. There's a need in the next 40 years for the agricultural food system of the world to produce as much nourishment in that 40-year period as it's produced in the last 8,000 years. So there's a big task ahead, and it's very complex. Somebody asked, I think it was from a 1 Acre Fund, how do we know that the CGIAR and international research will be able to get to the poorest? And Mark also described, and I totally agree with him, that if research, if the technology, the policies, the methodologies, the knowledge, the evidence isn't used for the purpose of achieving those development goals, the MDGs, for example, then there's no point doing the research. Ultimately, they must be used for effective purpose. And as part of the changes in the CGIAR, the new portfolio of programs which Frank described earlier, the investment of $5 billion over the next 5 years in these major programs with shared objectives with partners, then in developing those, the funders have actually given approval for that funding to flow because those programs have laid out very clear uptake pathways and plausible theories of change that will actually justify why that research will create development impact. And a new mantra within the CGIAR is that the CGIAR is fully accountable for the research outputs, but co-responsible for research outcomes in development terms. And so this is something rather new in the CGIAR for the international community of research to actually link up with many partners who work very close to intermediate and to end users of the technology and the policy which comes out of CG research. So, to those, I don't know if that was a planted question by 1 Acre Fund, but, for example, they would be an organisation that we know gets to the very poor farmer and probably a likely candidate for partnership with international research. So, I could go on, but I don't think you want me to. Let me say the final point. For those of you in the audience who do either work for organisations that provide funding for research or have influence in organisations that provide funding for research, just remember this, that research in agriculture is a long-term endeavour. We invest in research today for enhanced productivity tomorrow. When we say tomorrow, read in 10 years or 15 years' time. Time is very short. We've got 40 years to get to 2050 when the food production and nourishment needs to increase so much, but the clock's ticking. And every day or every month or every year that we delay getting to the full complement of funding we need, for example, for the CGIAR research programs, which we still have a gap before we get to the annual billion that we need. Hopefully we'll go further than that as well. But it's cumulative. The delay will be cumulative. So there's a call for action, and it's a call for urgent action. So please take the message home. Don't wait for next financial year. Start putting in your bids for increased funding, whether you do it at the national level, regional level, international level, or CGIAR. We must support our agricultural research for development in its widest sense now, including forest, nutrition, climate change, etc.
Thank you. Jonathan? Francis?
Thank you. Quickly to the people who asked questions, to the gentleman who asked about drylands, see me later. We've done some research on dryland forest-related issues, or currently in the process of refreshing that research agenda, so we'd be interested in your ideas. To the gentleman who asked about land grabbing, I can also introduce you to colleagues who've been doing research on large-scale land acquisitions and their impact on forests and the people who depend on those forests for customary livelihoods, so happy to talk more. Sarah, state of the science on landscapes. Certainly early days. We've been struggling with this, but one of the new features of the CGIAR research portfolio are these things called sentinel landscapes. And so we're right in the process of trying to design integrated science at the landscape scale. So we're hoping to push that frontier forward. Two takeaway messages, if I may, Frank. The first is that I hope I've given you a teaser about the role of forests, in a landscape approach, and certainly the relationship to food security, but also more broadly water security, climate security, certainly conservation of biological diversity, and many other sustainable development goals. The state of the science on those forests and relationships will be on display tomorrow afternoon at another event at the Royal Tulip Hotel. You're all invited. It's called the 8th Roundtable, and it's really trying to explore what forest contributes to all those other sustainable development goals. Finally, I appreciate Raj's description earlier in this session about the importance of gender in the broadly defined agricultural research enterprise and how far we need to go. I would certainly assert that it's also important for natural resources management all the way up and down the scale, not just at the household level, but all the way up into international decision making. We've got good research that having a critical mass of women in decision-making changes the decisions that come out of decision-making processes. And yet, women remain underrepresented in agricultural research and development decision-making. When I step down from my position in a few months' time, there will be only one female DG out of 15 in the CGIAR system. So let me ask all of you who are young women in the audience, please aspire to these leadership positions. And let me ask all of you who represent the organization sponsoring this event, use that talent. Thank you.
Thank you for making my job easier. First of all, a quick reference to a smallholder farmer, if you would permit me. When we planned for the Global Conference for Agriculture Research for Development in Montpellier, which was a reform process in itself, to be organized jointly by GFAR and CGIAR, the whole focus was on reorientation of agriculture research for development. And key messages were that you have to think out of box. Business as usual will not do. You will have to keep a smallholder farmer in focus, and participatory research involving them would be the only way to move forward. Also, another message was that we have to go in towards farming systems approach or landscape approach. If you don't do this, farmer will not be able to sustain only on crops alone. And the third message was that we have to invest and maybe triple our investment, not only double. Those who have invested have progressed. And the last message there, in fact, was in the context of international and national reforms. International reforms taking place through SRF in CGIAR, through GCARD roadmap in GFAR. But at national level, you have to move NARI into NARS, means bringing in stakeholders and making national agriculture research institutes into national agriculture research systems by involving CSOs and private sector. Having said this, I would come to my message, if you permit me, and these are short ones. relating to, again, women in agriculture, that we definitely need to invest more to engender agriculture. If we don't do this, we will be missing an opportunity. And this is an opportunity today. Second is that we have to provide enabling environment for their efficient performance. And that would require policy, legal, technological, credit, socio-economic aspects to be addressed critically and scientifically. And the third one is that we have to provide empirical evidence to the global community that any support to them will really make the difference, so that funding comes forward. And the last message is that there also we would need institutional reforms. We would need institutions like a National Institute for Women in Agriculture in India. We don't see many institutions of that kind elsewhere. I think the time has come that we have institutions of that kind, and we have to reorient our research agenda to bring in focus for role of women, like CGIAR is now planning to have a CGIAR gender program. Same way, GFAR is thinking of having the Global in Partnership program. So these are new opportunities, and I am sure we will move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. With that, those are the key messages from the panel. I mean, the original program then gave me about 10 minutes to sum up. Well, I was quite happy to sort of give up almost all of that for your questions and contributions from the panel. Let me just use a minute or so to sum up. This panel, this afternoon session, started with a very inspiring example of the progress made in Brazil, very much driven by innovation through research in agriculture, science and technology. That is an example that we can aspire to follow. And indeed, one of you asked, so what is that worth for Africa? I can tell you, when I was Director General of the International Water Management Institute in Sri Lanka, we had a large program on the comprehensive assessment of water management for agriculture. And a key perspective there from an agro-ecosystem perspective was that potentially the highest potential for increase in productivity left in the world are the African savannas. And the African savannas are called Tirado in Brazil. So in a way, Brazilians have shown that indeed those ecosystems can be made extremely productive from an agro-ecosystem perspective. Of course, what is missing is the Embrapas. What is missing is the government policy that we talked about before, that at that scale would really sort of drive the change needed. So I'm not saying that following Brazil's example in Africa is going to be easy. There are going to be very complex questions. So indeed, we've been shown what the potential of research is, what it can do, but I think you all, through your questions in the panel, showed what the challenges are. But are we ready to take those challenges on? In response to your question, we've certainly been reorganized in a very, very strategic and I think thorough way to be ready for those challenges. And I believe that this portfolio of research programs that we're launching here today, I wouldn't say that it's the answer. It's more a work in progress. But it's a transition from a very complex and quite fragmented set of activities into a much more focused, much more targeted, and potentially much more high-impact set of activities. So yes, I think the promise is there that we are ready. We'll need to keep working rather hard. We are aware of that. We are encouraged by the increasing funds, but not exactly all the funds we would need are there, and certainly not all those other accompanying investments are on the table. So Jonathan's encouragement that, sustained, increased investment in agriculture is critical. We hope that that is a message that will be heard loud and clear from many of you that will be participating in other events here in Rio. With that, I think we come to a conclusion that now, as I like to say, agriculture and the environment our best friends. We have to work together in partnership to come up with a sustainable, food-secure future, and that points in just one of the many directions where we need solid partnerships. Partnerships with farmers, partnerships with the private sector, partnerships on health and nutrition. This is a complex business. None of us can do this alone. It will definitely require really solid partnerships, and if events like Rio can contribute to those, then this is probably all worth the time and effort that you spent sitting in these chairs and getting really tired of listening to me. So, with that, can we release you and go to the coffee break, Samantha, or should I give it back to you for what is next? We appreciated your questions. And thank the panel for their energy and enthusiasm in giving us answers.
Very much to Frank and to our distinguished panelists. Thank you very much.